Hello friends! Welcome back my YouTube channel. If you want to watch the super hit movie Wild Card in full HD, then first of all, give this video a like, and if you are visiting our channel for the first time, then subscribe to this channel. The name of the movie we are going to discuss in today's video is Wild Card. So we will give you information about how and where you will get to watch Wild Card film officially. Apart from this, we will give you a detailed look at the pre-production, post-production, budget, box office collection, and filming of this movie. A detailed review of the movie will also be given in this video, where we will explain the story of this movie in detail. We will also discuss the cast and casting performance of the movie. Apart from this, information about the music department and technical department will also be given. Because of this video is going to be very interesting and entertaining. So, you must watch this video till the end. And if you haven't liked this video yet, then like this video now and subscribe to this channel. So, let's start the video. Wild Card is a 2015 American action thriller film directed by Simon West and starring Jason Statham, Michael Angarano, Milo Ventimiglia, Dominic Garcia-Laredo, Anne Heche, and Sofia Vergara. Based on the 1985 novel Heat by William Goldman, it is a remake of the 1986 adaptation that starred Burt Reynolds. The film was released in the United States on January 30th, 2015, in a limited release and through video on demand. Wild Card received negative reviews and was a box office bomb, making only $6.7 million worldwide against a $30 million budget. Plot: Nick Wilde is a recovering gambling addict who takes odd jobs in Las Vegas as a chaperone, his version of a bodyguard, to support his addiction. After helping a client impress a woman, he accepts a proposition from a young man, Cyrus Kinnick, to show him around Vegas and provide protection while he gambles. While eating at a diner, Nick's waitress friend Roxy hands him a message from a woman he knows, Holly, who wants him to stop by her house. Holly, a professional escort, explains she had a date the previous night at the Golden Nugget. Afterward, she was brutally raped and beaten by 3 unknown men in their hotel room. Holly asks Nick to find out who they are so that she can sue them. Nick discovers that the man responsible for raping Holly is Danny DeMarco, a gangster who had 2 of his thugs dump her in a hospital car park. Nick goes to the hotel to confront DeMarco, and a confrontation develops, resulting in Nick overpowering DeMarco and his men, who are tied up. Nick calls Holly, who contemplates castrating DeMarco, who then breaks down and begs her forgiveness. Holly decides to just take the $50,000 from DeMarco's desk and leaves. Holly splits the money with Nick and leaves Las Vegas. Nick takes Cyrus to a casino, and whilst playing blackjack with dealer friend Cassandra, Nick goes on a huge winning streak with the next dealer, amassing over $500,000. But when he goes to the cashier, he has a sudden anxiety attack and decides to keep on gambling, eventually losing all his winnings, as well as his original $25,000 on a single blackjack bet with Cassandra. The next morning, Cyrus, revealed to be a self-made millionaire, wants Nick to mentor him on being brave, but Nick declines. At the bar, DeMarco's men arrive to deliver Nick to DeMarco, but Nick fends them off. Nick meets with Baby, the mafia boss of Las Vegas. Baby has received a complaint from DeMarco, who claims that Nick broke into his hotel room, pistol whipped him, and killed 2 of his men, all to fund his gambling addiction. Baby takes Nick to a room with DeMarco, where Nick tells his side of the story, that DeMarco killed his own men to save face after begging for his life, and that DeMarco bears a cut on his penis. Baby tells DeMarco to drop his pants to prove Nick wrong, but he refuses and leaves. At the local diner, Cyrus offers Nick a check for $500,000 and a plane ticket to Corsica for what he has learned from Nick. DeMarco and his men appear in the diner, Cyrus shows his newfound manliness by singing loudly as a distraction so Nick can escape. Nick thinks about his sailboat and then kills the thugs and DeMarco with his utensils behind the diner. Afterwards, Cyrus insists Nick take the check and the ticket, and Nick accepts. Nick then drives out of Las Vegas. Cast: Jason Statham as Nick Wilde, Michael Angarano as Cyrus Kinnick, Milo Ventimiglia as Danny DeMarco, Dominic Garcia Loredo as Holly, Anna Hetch as Roxy, Sofia Vergara as Dide, Max Casella as Osgood, Jason Alexander as Pinches, Pinky Zion, Francois Vincentelli as Benny Production. Simon West said that Jason Statham developed the project himself. Maybe over 5 years. At one point, Brian De Palma was slated to direct until West replaced him. West stated, he'd sue. Statham showed it to me once when we were doing Mechanic, but I was off doing something else. But then he showed it to me again after Expendables 2, and I got into it, because of the writing, really. William Goldman is a hero of mine. I actually worked with him on The General's Daughter. He did plot hole work on the script. So this was a chance to work with him on a whole script, not just a Polish on a script. West said the script filmed was the one Goldman wrote over 30 years ago. He later elaborated, I rang him up and said, I'm about to put the record straight and fix this film for you. I did ask him, what's your one piece of advice for me when shooting this? He said, just make sure that Nick is the toughest guy you've ever seen in your life. That, I think, is his approach. No matter how complicated the character is intellectually, no matter how much dialogue there is, or twists and turns Goldman puts in the script, at the end of the day, he has this one thing that he has above his desk that reminds him what the character should be. It was the same for me. Once he told me that Nick's the toughest guy in Vegas, every scene informs that. Even when he's not doing anything, everybody in the room knows that, and everybody knows his history, what he's capable of. And so, he ultimately doesn't have to do that much, because he is the toughest guy in Vegas. It was nice firstly to have a script that was so set, because on any big movie scripts are constantly in flux, said West. It also made it easy to sell to actors like Stanley Tucci and Sofia Vergara, because their parts were very set out. There's nothing in the script that's really aged. There's no pyrotechnics or technology, really. Filming began in early 2013 in New Orleans, Louisiana. The principal photography began in February 2013. Simon West said the 3 fights were character-driven. Each one of the action moments is character-driven. So you're right, it builds up. So when it does explode, it's exploding for the right reason. The first one, he's getting back into his old skills. Precision fighting. The only way he's going to get out alive is by relying on his old skills. And he's a master of that. The second fight explodes out of anger. And it's really anger at himself for going back to being a gambling addict. They're character-driven fights. Whereas, traditionally, in action films, they're light relief. They're almost commercial breaks in the story. These ones come out of the situation his character's in, not just that he's in jeopardy and has to fight his way out of it. They're emotional fights. Marketing. The trailer for Wildcard debuted on December 12, 2014. West later recalled, it was a formidable thing. There are pages and pages of dialogue. It's a drama, really. It's not an action film, really. It's a character piece. Jason Statham is the lead in every scene, and he has huge dialogue scenes. I knew he was passionate about it, but was like, are you happy with all this dialogue stuff? And he said, yes, I love it. I want to do it. So I turned up on the first day, not knowing what it was going to turn out like. Especially after The Mechanic, where he only has 5 lines in the whole film. That character has no dialogue, but we turned up on the first day, and he knew every word by heart and was amazing. So, Wild Card, I think, will surprise a lot of people. It's a very strong dramatic piece by him. There are, of course, also 2 or 3 fights. I think some of his best fights ever are in it. They're very realistic, and we spent a lot of time on them, so they're very detailed and very well executed, I think. But it's a great performance, and he's surrounded by some very cool actors. Stanley Tucci, Anne Heche, Sofia Vergara. He's in a proper actor's environment, and he really stepped up. I was amazed. I think this is just the beginning for him. I think you'll see a lot more dramatic stuff from him. Release. Lionsgate released the film in a limited release and through on demand on January 30th, 2015. Reception. Box office. Wild Card was a box office flop, making only $6.7 million against a $30 million budget. Critical response. Wild Card has generally received negative reviews from film critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 30% based on reviews from 56 critics, with an average rating of 4.85 out of 10. The site's consensus states, hardcore Jason Statham fans may enjoy parts of Wild Card, but all other action aficionados need not apply. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 40 out of 100 based on reviews from 19 critics. Betsy Sharkey of the Los Angeles Times gave the film a negative review, calling Wild Card predictable. She summed up her review by saying that Wild Card is no royal flush, no full house, no three of a kind. A bust is, I think, the term I'm searching for. Jason Statham movies aren't known for their dialogue. People attend his films for their action sequences, which is why so few filmmakers give Statham much to say. That's a shame, because when given the rare chance to be chatty, Statham becomes more than just a lethal weapon. Wild Card gives him more opportunities to converse than to clobber, and as odd as this may sound, I really enjoyed listening to Statham talk. His fight scenes have their predictable, violent payoffs, but his rambling monologues are unexpectedly, gloriously entertaining. This film's tagline should be, "Come for the stabbing, stay for the gabbing." With Wild Card, screenwriter William Goldman takes a third crack at the story of Nick the Vegas chaperone. Goldman wrote the source novel and a 1986 film adaptation starring Burt Reynolds, both of which were called Heat. Had the 1986 version starred Bruce Willis instead of Reynolds, Wild Card would be redundant. Statham's take on Nick evokes Willis in his prime. He's as quick to cut a villain down with a quip as he is with a sharp object, and a gloomy rain cloud of vulnerability seems to perpetually hang over his head. Details of Nick's former life are left vague, though one can assume he has an intimate knowledge of all things violent. His current incarnation is a friendly British chap who does favors for people. Everyone we encounter mentions these favors and how indebted they are to Nick. His latest assignment requires him to get beaten to a pulp by a pudgy, balding guy trying to impress Sofia Vergara. The ruse works, and Nick gets $500 for his troubles. The money helps finance his eventual escape from Las Vegas. Nick's desired getaway locale, Corsica, appears in brief flashbacks that look like Ralph Lauren ads. Nick's next assignment involves the battered woman dumped out of a car in Wild Card's first scene. She's Holly, Dominic Garcia Laredo, an escort who once loved Nick. When he hit rock bottom, she nursed him back to health. Now she wants Nick to help her find the man who brutally raped her before his henchmen left her for dead at the hospital. Since Nick knows everyone in the underbelly of Vegas, including a kingpin named Baby, Stanley Tucci, he easily finds the guilty party. Sadistic mafioso Danny DeMarco, Milo Ventimiglia, and his henchmen cross paths with Nick at DeMarco's hotel suite, ushering in the first instance of Statham doing what you paid to see him do. Rather than kill Danny, Nick merely roughs him up, paving the way for Holly to exact a humiliating, though non-lethal vengeance on Danny's most prized possession. For his troubles, Nick is paid $50,000 in hush money from Danny's stash. As Holly rides off into an avenged sunset, Nick heads for the nearest blackjack table to attempt the final big score that will hasten his exit from Sin City. The movie is about 40 minutes old. It's here that we realize that Wild Card is 2 parts The Gambler and 3 parts The Equalizer. It's better at the former than it is the latter. Statham reeks of a compulsive desperation Mark Wahlberg can't touch, and director Simon West films the big high-stakes gambling sequence with a white-knuckled excitement sorely missing from Wahlberg's remake. It helps that the wonderful Hope Davis plays Nick's friend and dealer, Cassandra. Davis does more with a sympathetic glance than pages of exposition could describe. There's another assignment for Nick, and Goldman uses it as a rather sloppy way of tying all his plot threads together. A rich 23-year-old software developer named Cyrus Kinnick, Michael Angarano, channeling a young Matthew Broderick, wants to pay Nick to teach him how to be brave, show tunes, and the return of a very angry, slightly mutilated Danny DeMarco figure in Cyrus's lessons. There's also a fight scene set to the Drifters' version of White Christmas, a mobster summit that hinges on seeing a character's penis, and Statham finding a use for teaspoons and butter knives that Emily Post wouldn't endorse, but Quentin Tarantino would. Throughout, Statham expertly handles Goldman's sometimes absurd dialogue. The film is at its best when Nick chats with people. Wild Card wisely casts its supporting characters with actors who leave an impression, including Davis's dealer, Anne Heech's diner waitress, Davinia McFadden's information gathering maid, Jason Alexander's office mate, and Tucci's head honcho, Baby. The folks in Nick's orbit form a self-contained society with its own set of rules and regulations. Wild Card has a finely tuned sense of the Vegas working class, of people who are off the beaten path, hustling in the harsh light of day that most tourists sleep through. It's kind of a shame that the film feels compelled to interrupt this feeling with violence. There's less than you might be expecting, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say those scenes are fun in the most gratuitously brutal ways. One guy gets gruesomely slashed with a credit card. But you've seen Statham do all that before, and it clashes with the novel-like vibe Goldman successfully creates. Perhaps that's why movies give Statham little to say. His gift of gab overshadows his penchant for mayhem. Wild Card review. In the sorely underrated Hummingbird, oil wrestling action man Jason Statham tried to get us to love his soul rather than just his body. This weirdly faithful remake of the 1986 Burt Reynolds vehicle Heat, adapted by screenwriter William Goldman from his own novel, makes a similar play for our affections, and, despite landing a lackluster punch in the US, it plays its hand with enjoyable, off-kilter bravado. As before, the existential compulsive gambler narrative sets Vegas chaperone Nick, the Stath, against heavily protected scumbag Danny DeMarco, Milo Ventimiglia, on a rape revenge mission that spirals into episodic oddness, interspersed with bouts of satisfyingly limb-ripping violence. Garden shears are applied to shrinking penises. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are won and lost on gambling tables. Double vodkas are drunk. Dreams are realized, abandoned, and dreamed anew. Knives and fists are crunchily smashed into sinew, skin, and bone. Through it all, Statham's facial expression and vocal delivery remain the same. An iconic monotone surrounded by a rogues gallery of smartly chosen screen thespians, everyone from Anne Heche to Stanley Tucci, who effectively do the acting for him. Heaven knows what Brian De Palma, originally slated to direct, would have made of it, but nuts and bolts man Simon West, with whom Statham remade The Mechanic, keeps things simple. As for the Stath, he may never be a great or even good actor, but the camera loves him and he fights like a dancer, a quality rare among English-speaking action heroes. There's Also a fight scene set to the Drifters' version of White Christmas. A mobster submit that hinges on seeing a character's penis, and Statham finding a use for teaspoons and butter knives that Emily Post wouldn't endorse, boutin' to rent no wood. Throughout, Statham expertly handles Goldman's sometimes absurd dialogue. The film is at its best when Nick chats with people. Wildcard wisely casts its supporting characters with actors who leave an impression, including Davis Steeler, and Hatch's diner waitress, A.D. Avenue McFayton's information gathering maid, a Jason Alexander's office mate, and 2 cheesehead honcho baby. The folks in Exorbit form a self-contained society with its own set of rules and regulations. Wildcard has a finely tuned sense of the Vegas working class of people who are off the beaten path, hustling in the harsh light of day that most tourists sleep through. It's kind of a shame that the film feels compelled to interrupt this feeling with violence. There's less than you might be expecting, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say those scenes are fun in the most gratuitously brutal ways. One guy gets gruesomely slashed with a credit card, but you've seen Statham do all that before, and it clashes with the novel-like vibe Golden successfully creates. Perhaps that's why movies give Statham little to say. His gift of gab overshadows his penchant for mayhem in the sorely underrated A Hummingbird. A oil wrestling action man, Jason Statham, tried to get us to love his soul rather than just his body. This weirdly faithful remake of the 1986 Burt Reynolds via Klahida, adapted by screenwriter William Goldman from his own novel, makes a similar play for our affections. And despite landing a lackluster punch in the US, it plays its hand with enjoyable, off-kilter bravado. As before, the existential, compulsive, gambler narrative sets Vegas chaperonic, the state, against heavily protected, scumbag Danny DeMarco, Milo Ventimiglia, on a rape revenge mission that spirals into a episodic cadness interspersed with boats of satisfyingly limb-ripping violence. Garden shears are applied to shrinking penises. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are won and lost on gambling tables. Double vodkas are drunk, dreams are realized, abandoned, and dreamed. Anew knives and fists are crunchily smashed into sinew, skin, and bone. Through it all, Statham's facial expression and vocal delivery remain the same. An iconic monotone surrounded by a rogues gallery of smartly chosen screens. Everyone from Anne Hatch to Stanley Tucci, who effectively do the acting for him. Heaven knows what Brian De Palma, originally slated to direct, would have made of it. But nuts and bolts man Simon West, with whom staff Mary Mattia the mechanic keeps things simple. As for the state, he may never be a great or even good actor, but the camera loves him and he fights like a dancer. A quality rare among English-speaking action heroes. This is the archive of The Observer up until April 21st, 2025. The Observer is now owned and operated by Tortoise Media. Gamblers beware. If you think the odds are high that a Vegas S.A. Jason Stay movie A and 1 directed by Asman West, The Expendables 2A will include lots of skull busting and slot, machine smashing, then you may want to lower your bets. Not that a wild card doesn't have a few vintage stamanical beatdowns with such items as a credit card, a tablespoon, and a pair of garden shears used in ways you could only imagine. But the action otherwise takes a back seat to boilerplate dramatics and offbeat existential brooding in this underwhelming, though slickly helmed crime flick, which was adapted day, and not for the first time, by the greater William Gold, Man a Marathon Man, from his own novel released mid-January in France before going out stateside at the end of the month. The film should cash in on Statham's loyal fan base, but will be a letdown to anyone looking for a real thrill ride. An opening sequence where Sin City bodyguard Nick Wilde Statham receives a major weapon at the hands of a neebish ladies' man, Casella reveals that this will not be your typical Statham actioner. There's certainly nothing wrong with that, although what comes next isn't really better. A bizarre melange of mafioso-fueled plot cliches and vodka-fueled self-pity as I leaving Las Vegas, and a Rush Hour 2A had been tossed onto a mixer, shaken, stirred, and served with way too much ice. Nick's dream is to make $500,000 so he can live on a boat in Corsica. But given his deadbeat job and depressing motel apartment, he's a long way from his goal. When an old girlfriend, Dominic Garcia Lori, rings him up after being viciously assaulted, Nick can't help but track down the culprit, a visiting mobster, Milo Ventimiglia, shacked up with his cronies at the Golden Nugget, which receives some highly unflattering advertising here, or else some very good product placement, depending on whether your vacation plans include rape, murder, or complimentary drink vouchers. The first brawl occurs between Nick and the baddies at around the 40-minute mark, and although it's well choreographed by Aurina, the Transportress series, and covered by Pashelli Johnson, Captain America, the first Avenger in slow-mo, fast-mo, and extreme close-ups, it doesn't make up for the overall shortage of adrenaline. Meanwhile, a subplot involving a zealous young Bostononian, Michael Angarano, who hires Nick to guard him for a night, isn't fleshed out enough and winds up getting dropped, then picked up again when Nick nearly strikes it big. Indeed, the highlight of a wild card may not be its trio of fight scenes, but the extended gambling sequence where Nick bets his future on a few hands of blackjack, with the hope Dave Isaac camming as a downbeat local dealer. Statham is good at keeping his cards close as an actor and manages to build tension here without doing too much. Yet, even that scene is followed by a ridiculous one that has Nick staring deeply into his soul in the bathroom mirror, then beating the crap out of a hand dryer set in present-day Vegas, but entrenched in movie stereotypes, especially the mob stuff that have been around for decades. The Actu script offers up an incongruous combo of old and slightly new, as if Goldman stepped in to just touch up a few scenes of a 1986 screenplay that was made into the Burt Reynolds star Rajita A so that they would fit Statham's pedigree. The results fall short of the latter's previous collaboration with Wes Mechanic, whose doses of stylized combat made up for its general lack of subtlety. Here, the team doesn't quite deliver on the action front. While the story of Nick's boo-soaked redemption fails to captivate by doubling down on a movie that yearns to be both introspective and bone-crunchingly cool. A wild card overplays its hand, the first film I saw of 2015. And man, if it isn't my all-made Jason Statham, or as I call him, the Stents, the man just keeps on keeping on turn-earning out action, flick after action, flick a modern-day Jean-Claude Van Damme, only with actual screen presence and more than only a facial expression. And even though most of his films follow a similar template, he's always a man with special skills, irrespective of his current career choice, and end with the Statham busting plenty of heads, laying the smack on all manner of henchmen, thugs, and mobsters. Usually, Statham's a wise enough performer to surround himself with quality talent, ensuring that even when he's not able to carry the film, with his considerable screen personality, others are able to share the load. It's a formula which has served him well through direct, like a Parker mediocre material, like a Safe and tentpole projects, like Hia, The Expendables, and The Wild Card serves up that formula once more. Rather, Statham plays a grumbly tough guy who deals in darkness but desperately wants the light. Wild Card is one of the better staff films in recent times. Noida doesn't stretch the Saint the Sense much as an actor, at least not outside his normal ability. So, in that sense, you can expect a solidly workmanlike performance from the leading man. It's directed by Simon West, the man who gave you a Saikon era, for which I'll forever be in his debt, and the STA sense to The Expendables too. So, I knew going in it have at least a modicum of decent style and a technical proficiency. A wild card is a proficient that lays down the smack with considerable tenacity, with West's talent for making men cross their legs. Milo Ventimiglia delivers a career best performance as a man about to have his bit sliced off, and women look sexy and powerful at the same time coming into play early on. The Stents plays Nick Wilde, a Las Vegas chauffeur with a set of special skills who kind of makes enemies of a powerful mob gang led by Stanley Tuohy after he allows a female friend Dominic Garcia Lori to gain revenge on one punter who goes too far. Ventimiglia. Wild Carter is pure B-movie. Cheese. It's got all the Vegas cliches, all the crime thriller tropes, and all the elements of a modern annoyer classic, only without the classic. It's hardly the all-out gung-ho modus operandi of an Expendable as a movie and a wild card. It does try and give the Statham character more depth than many of his movies, but it never escapes the film. It truly is a genre flick following the same rules and regulations as all his others. Nick Wilde, because his character has to sound cool, right, is a decent guy caught in a shitty life. A living in Vegas dealing with scum and low life. Every day, hoping to catch a break and leave the nightlife forever after being the standover man for a girlfriend's revenge. Nick wins big at a casino with luck calling before having one last bet to win big and leave town. Forever. Naturally, things don't go to plan. The key to the film is its dialogue. Although the Statham isn't known for his linguistic dexterity, nor his vocabulary ever being able to extend beyond 3-syllable words, but the wild card that tries to mollify the bang hordes with some semblance of a change of pace. The Statham plays Nick with the flawed, sucked into the depths nightmare of a man caught in a world he hates and can't escape. Michael Angarano playing Cyrus Kinnick becomes the light at the end of the tunnel for Nick, a young, rich kid seeking adventure. It's when the chickens come home to roost for Nick that the Statham lays down his charismatic actor mode and slips quickly into head cooker mode. The Statham is immediately likable here, doing what he does best, and at least trying it to go somewhere he hasn't been since Blitzdoo wildcard attempts to become some kind of labyrinth theme, multi-layer story about redemption, I think, and guilt, again, I think. But midway through it, fumbles the ball not badly above enough to derail its good intentions for a bit. There's not an AUA brawling to satisfy the action quotient and a such a on-linear attack and without real believability to make it all worthwhile. Classy talent like Hope Davis, Jason Alexander, Sofia Vergara, and Anne Hatch provide some nice cameo appearances, but amongst the many flaws mainstream critics will have with the wild card, they're not amongst them unless you count underuses of valid criticism. But to pinpoint the appeal of British B-movie bruiser Jason Statham, one need look no further than the place where the ball of Statham's foot, the crown of his head, or the bend of his elbow makes sudden bone-shattering contact with some lesser specimen of the human gene pool. Such collisions, alas, are too few and far between, and Wild Card, a serviceable Vegas neoneer that carries an unusually Tony pedigree for a staff vehicle in this form of Oscar-winning screenwriter William Goldman, but lacks the amped-up Looney Tunes mayhem of the Transporter and Crank franchises. Lionsgate is wisely betting low on this January 30th release with a limited theatrical run and a more aggressive VOD push. That wild card represents the second attempt by Goldman, All the President's Men, The Princess Bride, and producer Cash and El Wessa to fashion a movie from the writer's 1985 paperback Potboiler Heat about the various entanglements of one Nika Escalante, a scene's Philip Marlowe, type working as a bodyguard for hire in the bowels of Sin City, released in 1986. Heat. The movie was a famously troubled affair that starred the fading Bear Reynolds as the supposedly Mexican-American Escalante, and went through a revolving door of directors, including Robert Altman, who left before filming began, Dick Richards, who quit after Reynolds reportedly socked him in the face, and Jerry Jameson. Given all that, the end result was surprisingly seamless, albeit a box office bomb, with the miscast Reynolds bringing a nicely worried ex-athlete swagger to the role, at least until the movie arrived at its alleged action scenes, rendered with all the kinetic intensity of a Gerald commercial. The action in Wildcard is markedly more adept thanks to the work of Hong Kong choreographer Corey Wen, who put Statham through his paces on the Transporter films, and who has a grand old time here staging an epic casino brawl scored to the director's cover version of White Christmas. But when the fists and roundhouse kicks aren't flying, there's lots of downtime in Wildcard, during which the film tries to make a compelling character study out of Escalante One here, rechristened Nick Wilde, a compulsive personality drawn equally to the blackjack table and to sob story underdogs in need of a helping hand. In a lively opening scene, Wilde appears to get his clock cleaned by a feisty pit boss, Max Casella, half his size in a bar parking lot. But the whole thing turns out to be a setup, a charade designed to make the other man look tough in front of his sultry girlfriend, Sofia Vergara. That, you see, is the kind of guy Nick Wilde is. Goldman has cited that scene is the impetus for writing Heat, and nothing that comes after it quite measures up for the new film. The writer has done little but dust off his earlier screenplay and update some dollar amounts to 2014 prices. Directed by Asaman Westa, The Mechanic, The Expendables 2, Wild Carbles, episodically from vigilante revenge fantasy to mismatched body movie, as Wilde comes first to the aid of a woman, Dominic Garcia Laredo from his past, who's been brutally raped by a pretty boy gangster, Milo Ventimiglia, and later a meek computer whiz, Michael Angarano, who wants Nick to teach him how not to get dirt kicked in his face. When Wilde isn't buffing the floor with the carcasses of the various thick-necked goons who dare to cross his path, he tries gambling his way to the fake money he needs in order to quit Vegas for good and retire to a life of leisure in Corsica. Seen in fleeting dream-like glimpses, perhaps to satisfy some sort of French tax credit. As usual, Statham gets a lot of mileage out of his draw, ever-present scowl, but, as in Heat, the movie's disparate narrative strands never really come together, and the climactic showdown feels pretty anticlimactic. That's at least partly because Goldman has excised the ludicrous third act of his novel, in which, among other things, the Angarano character is revealed to be the post-top transsexual daughter of a prominent televangelist couple without creating a new one to take its place. Goldman's dialogue, however, is still juicier than most, especially when it's being spoken by the likes So Fastly Tassa as a powerful casino boss and a Hope Disa as a flinty blackjack dealer. They seem to be inhabiting their own private story on the edges of Wildcard about the grizzled Vegas veterans who've hung around too long and seen too many dreams vaporize in the desert air. And they give you the only unpredictable sparks to a movie altogether less wild than Stayed. Action films are supposed to make you sit tight in your seat, relax, and while enjoying your popcorn, be engaged and entertained following the adventures of the good guy who teaches life lessons to those who for some reason have hurt someone he cares about. Generally speaking, the genre is acknowledged to be wildly interesting. Unfortunately, that is not the case of director Simon West's new action drama Wildcard, with Jason Statham as a leading actor. Nick Wilde is an ex-gambler who is currently in Las Vegas, working as a bodyguard for those who need his help. One day, his ex-lover approaches him and asks for help in finding the guys who are harassing her. Even though Nick knows how dangerous it will be, he still goes after a man named Danny, only to leave his assignment unfinished, a broken bar. The beginning of Wildcard is quite promising. A Latina woman in a bar waits a man while staring at drunk Wild, who is annoying her with his brazen attitude. With the arrival of her married boyfriend, who tries to show Nick how helpless the dynamic start of the film immediately comes to an end. From there on, the viewer is left to figure out the rest of this story on their own, since Wild seems to have nothing more to offer. The slow start, followed by pointless and drugged-out scenes, continue until Nick's ex-girlfriend comes onto the screen. This is where I found myself wanting to leave the auditorium. Because at this point, the poor dialogue combined with Nick's unwillingness to help his friend went beyond all my expectations. We don't often see Jason's staff afraid of 3 gunmen and trying to avoid them at all costs. The prospect of getting killed in a fight would not have stopped him either. However, in West's Wildcard, Statham does not look like himself. Moreover, I would say he has never looked as bad as in this particular film. In conclusion, neither Statham, with all his charm and power, and nor the appearance of such actors as Stanley Tuohy, Hope Davis, or Sophie Vera, could not save this film from falling to the bottom of the pile. Bad editing, an incredibly unconvincing performance delivered by Statham, and a pointless plot, by the way, written by 2-time Academy Award winner William Goldman, the writer of The Princess Bride, make this film oddly boring. Even though the year has just begun, Wildcard will certainly make it to my short list of worst films of 2015. Understand why Jason Statham might want to expand his on-screen horizons. I don't think he has it in him, but I get it. What I don't get is why choose for such a creative endeavor. This regressive throwback, which would have been unpleasantly backward-looking in the mid-1980s when William Goldman published the novel it's based on, it was first adapted by Goldman himself for film in 1986. Starring Burt Reynolds, and titled The Heat. And it wasn't met with applause then either. Honestly, when I saw that Goldman was credited with the script here, I assumed that it must have been the same one from the 80s, which is apparently true, even though someone mentions Google in passing, because there's no way in hell he could have written something this unironically chilled a copyright after The Princess Bride. The State? The Expendables. 3, a home front as Las Vegas security. Consultant Nick Wilde is forced to grapple with much noirish exposition about how he's getting too old for this and ready to retire to Corsica. Why Corsica? Nobody seems to know. The noir gets the better of him. Wilde in Statham seems like a guy who would prefer to let his muscle card do his talking for him. Among the many people who adore him in spite of the fact that there's apparently not a lot of there are a hooker with a heart of gold, Dominic Garr, Colorado, a city island, a diner waitress with a Yoda-iki common wisdom, and Hatch the Other Guys, a berth and a casino crew, Bayer Rush Lucky Charm. Hope Davis, a real steal, a Signish, New York. The latter of whom we discover when Wild out of nowhere turns out to be a compulsive gambler because why not? There is also a gangster's brutal son, Milo Ventimiglia, a Grace of Monaco, a Grown Ups 2, and a marvelous crime boss. The always sublime Stanley Tuohy, The Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 1, a Transformers Age of Extinction appearing in the only scene that has any life to it because he's in it for Wild to contend with. That's Vegas, baby. A place where a beat-up hooker getting tossed out a moving car in the middle of the night is just another Tuesday. Foxter director Simon West, who directed not to the expandable Asabu, to the Expandables 2, and not Statham Vehicle the Transport Row, but Statham things, like let a Christmas song break out during a fight scene. No one knows why, we're probably better off not knowing what goes on in West's head anyway. Anyone who knows me or who has read any of my reviews or interviews over the past few decades knows of my admiration and affection for action films, stunt work, Jason Statham, director Simon West. Put all of those ingredients together and toss in a screenplay by William Goldman, and I'm in. Needless to say, you can imagine my excitement for Wild Guard as it not only blends all of those elements in this slick, as to be expected reflective and brooding crime drama, but minimizes the action, allows us to focus on character and the introspective nature of Statham's Nick Wilde, adapted by Goldman novel of the same name. Wild Card is not the typical Jason Statham Simon West action movie, now they're fourth teaming. While there are still more than sufficient displays of Statham's patented martial arts stylings to satisfy the most die-hard Statham fan, not to mention some slick maneuvers with credit cards and teaspoons, West, Goldman, and Statham allow us to sit back and enjoy the psychological gamesmanship of Nick Wilde and a wacky cast of characters who represent every patent in Las Vegas element imagined, centered around a mafioso hinged plotline. In short, I'm all about Wild Card. Nick Wilde, a for-hire security bodyguard, dreams of hitting a $500,000 score at the blackjack table so he can live out his life in peace on a boat in the calm waters of Corsica. But that's what makes Vegas Vegas. It's all about dreams. Dreams that one keeps chasing. And Nick has been chasing his for years, always there for a friend in need. Whether they can pay for his services or not, you get the sense that Nick will never hit pay dirt and Corsica will always be just a dream. When Nick gets a call for help from old girlfriend Holly, who has been viciously beaten and dumped at an emergency room door, despite thinking better of it, Nick hunts down the mobster who is sequestered away at the Golden Nugget. Danny DeMarco is a vicious, brutal thug who is more into looking the mobsters of Hollywood with the gold and the girls and the guns than playing smart, like the boss he thinks he is, makes him and his boys an easy target for Nick, who just wants to warn DeMarco. But, as we quickly see, a vengeful Holly has a more personal payback in mind. Enter the young Cyrus Kinnick, a wimpy-looking whisk kid from Boston seemingly on his own for the first time in his life. Cyrus believes he requires Nick's services as a bodyguard during his brief stay in Vegas. But it quickly becomes evident that not only is Cyrus not what he seems, but who's doing the protecting as Nick faces his own vodka diamonds and pension for pushing his luck. We make the rounds with him and meet a delicious array of characters, from the kindest, a dealer named Cassandra, to an hilarious setup involving an Abisha named Osgood and a doll named Dee Dee to nugget owner Baby, local attorney Pinky, and of course Roxy, the waitress with her ear to the ground and pulse on the city. As Nick Wilde, Jason Statham is perfection. Quiet, brooding, introspective, but with a wild streak. Yet, no one can build tension with silence, stillness, and just a stare like Statham. And he does just that in Wild Card, making one extended gambling scene more riveting than all the action of 3 key scenes put together. An interesting performance comes courtesy of Michael Angarano as Cyrus. Over the years, we've seen Angarano be timid or overconfident, but as Cyrus, he delivers a nervous Nelly complete with lovely little nuances with his posture, his walk, his hands. But then, in a climactic scene in Roxy's diner, turns the tables with a surprising uber confidence that zings. But it's the engaging play and chemistry between Angarano and Statham that has you doubling down with interest. Nice cameo turns by Jason Alexander and Ands hatches Pinky and Roxy respectively as Oh Good Max Casella is seen stealing, Scream particularly when it comes to his interplay with Sofia Vergara's Dee Dee, and plot twist with Statham that will have you in stitches, and I've got to hand it to Goldman and West, adding some great tongue and cheek double entendres to not only Statham's dialogue, but a Pepsi placement nod with its spokesperson Vera. Hope Davis adds some warmth and grounding as Cassie, not to mention serve as a conscience for Nick at times. Some real growth in her talents as an actress can be seen with Dominic Garcia Loro and her performance as Holly. Pushing the envelope and adding some texture to her emotional skill set is a nice touch for the character and film as a whole. But nothing is cooler or funnier than the scene of the year involving Stanley Tucci. Statham Milo Ventimiglia, as Ventimiglia is, DeMarco tries to wiggle his way out of a situation with Tucci's casino-owning baby. It's a deadpan throwdown between Statham and Tucci that is aureous hilarious. Everything about the scene is perfection, as Nick and Baby insist Marco drop his pants, comment on his manhood or a lack thereof, and make the most of an earlier event involving that manhood and a pair of sharp guarding clippers. West and Statham have taken a different tact with Wildcard, that while having less action than usual for Jason, is lensed with action edited by Thomas Norberg and Padre McKinley in a frame-by-frame manner to make it more rapid-fire, more surreal, more heightened, and more intense. Cinematographer Shelley Johnson nails it with a mix of slow-mo, extreme close-ups, and something that is becoming more frequent in hand-to-hand action sequences, fast mode. Wow. Dice and Slice comes out of nowhere on multiple occasions, and each time is shockingly cool. Editing itself is paced extremely well, giving us time to breathe in between the frenetic battles and the $500 gambling scene. ... So tense, so taut my palms were sweating. We are immersed in every moment of this film, keeping us on our toes. Goldman structures the story so that we're well into the second act, salivating in anticipation before Simon West and company kick into high gear with the first major action sequence. One of Statham's stalwart stunt fight choreographer Corey puts together some dynamic scenes which are showcased and enhanced by Shelley Johnson's lens. Watching Johnson's work over the years, starting with his first film, Made to Order, and moving into films like Last Castle, creating an intimate canvas, employing both grain work and claustrophobic, and into high-octane action with Captain America and Expendables 2. Johnson delivers some interesting camera angles, using not only a lot of Dutching, but a lot of mid-shots interspersed with Dutch close-ups that fuel the Vegas energy and vibe. Color saturation just lends to the heightened surrealism that is Vegas. While set in present-day Scribe William, Goldman peppers Wildcard with the requisite stereotypical Vegas mob elements we have so loved for decades, while tailoring specifics to Statham's brand of performance. It's a lovely meld of old and new. The poignancy and raw, visceral nature of the story and the characters, particularly that of Nick Wilde, can resonate with each of us with just the slightest look at our own lives. Characters are fun, and thanks to some great story structure and dialogue, in tandem with West's direction. We only need one scene with some of these characters to know who they are and why they are in Nick's life. I would have liked to see the character of Cyrus fleshed out a bit more, as he proves quite interesting in the hands of Angarano, yet given the ships that pass in the night idea of Vegas. The minimal depth works multi-extural and layered, and as with all of Goldman's works, deeper and more engaging than what's as on the surface, as in Statham Wildcard is supposed to be a badass, as much as in all the films he has done previously, but somehow he barely is. In fact, he is pretty much a loser who does not know when to quit and walk away. I know they are trying to make his character a little different as usual, and it does not work out. His character is far from intriguing. In fact, it contradicts how he was set up in the first place. Do people find it fascinating to see a character going from bad to worse? I certainly don't. And what is with this attempt to playing a character role and being philosophical? Only really good actors can make philosophy interesting. And Jason, I like you, but you do know you aren't one of them, right? We like you for fear handling action films quite well, but that is it. So, learn from this and make the movies we want you to make. Stay clear from this. It's not your typical Jason Statham flick. There are only a few action scenes with focus on something entirely else. But don't ask me what, because I did not care for it one bit. To be fair, there are 2 scenes I liked, but that was more because of in one scene, it was a satisfying display of justice, and in the other, you had Stanley Tucci. I think the biggest problem is that there is no real story here. That only works if you can offer something else like comedic situations or action, or at least something that is actually interesting to watch. Wildcard is very lacking, and it makes me curious what the original Heat 1986 with Burt Reynolds is like. Please save yourself some anguish and don't watch this one. What did I just watch? At first, I thought I was in for a typical Statham flick, low on plot, but high on action or thrills. And with this serial killer targeting cops, you have the ideal setup where Jason the cop is put against Blitz. The cop killer doesn't require much to make it eventful or exciting. And yet each time when you think it takes off and gets suspenseful, they distract you with this little subplot about this female cop that tries too hard to be a social commentary. Or is there another motive for showing this? If this was an attempt to make the audience sympathize with cops, then it miserably failed. In all fairness, I never really expected much from this as a thriller, but on the action front, surely you can count on Staff? Right? Wrong. The action is as bland as they come, and not once gets exciting. It is brutal and gritty at times, but that's it. All the time while I was watching this, I was wondering why I put myself through this torture. And not that it is always that awful. There are scenes that are quite funny, but they also detract from ever taking the film seriously. Then Blitz. He does not seem smart and does not use gloves or cleaning products, but amazingly, he leaves no evidence behind. No blood, no spit, no fingerprints. Yeah, right. To top it off, the ending. Don't worry, won't spoil it. But all this time, Blitz tried to be gritty and realistic, and then they give you an ending that is so far-fetched. You know, you have been wasting your time. Just stay clear from this one. It's bad and not in a good way, which is a shame since there is some talent involved that are deserving to be in a better movie. Another clone of the same movie that Jason Statham releases every year. So, this is a story that focuses on bodyguard security consultant Nick Wild Statham. He's a bit of a loser living life day to day doing his job, but mostly just wasting his money on booze and gambling. When he decides to help an old friend get her revenge on a dangerous man, he soon finds himself in hot water with the mob. I was still riding high on seeing a Furious 7A when I sat down to watch this. I've liked Statham in past movies, and while he was certainly playing a cartoon in Furious 7, I appreciated that it was at least a different kind of character. He always plays the tough guy, which is no surprise. But he almost always plays the likable rogue, never the villain. That was a nice change of pace to see him try something a little bit different. With Wildcard, he's back to basics. And if you're familiar with Statham's other works, Wildcard is very similar to Parker, Safe, Killer Elite, Blitz, The Mechanic, The Transporter, and a number of other films he's made throughout his 17-year career. This movie kind of popped up out of nowhere, which is a bit surprising. Staff movies don't typically make a ton of money, but at the very least, you see advertisements for them. This was more or less direct-to-video, which is odd because there are names featured here. If you look at the cast list, you will see that this has names like Jason Alexander, Stanley Tucci, Sofia Vergara, and Anne Hatch. Although all in very minuscule roles, those aren't exactly small fish. So why would this film get swept underneath the proverbial rug? When you sit down to watch it, you can see why this was the case. Addis is a film that is not really marketable or commercially viable. Addis is an attempt at a modern noir, and it's not a terribly pleasant or enjoyable story. Sure, the fight scenes are oily slick, and what most people want to see, or at least what the people who watch staff movies want to see. But it's such a dark story that it's difficult to connect with. Wildcard is a watchable film. It's just that there's nothing special about it. You have Stefan playing the same role that he always plays, and he is doing. So one cruise-controlled Buddha, it's never different enough to stand on its own. It's not written with any sparkle, and is kind of hard to like it. At a number of different points, the gambling scenes are pretty fun, but much like the gambler, you get to know the guy, so you know that it can't be long before he bottoms out again. If Jason Statham movies are your thing, you will likely enjoy this just as much as the others. I get a moderate amount of enjoyment from his library, so I give this a moderate rating, although I doubt I'm going to retain this for much longer than a month. With a 25-year career on his shoulders, director Simon West seems to have a knack for helming remakes. He first set out to bring 1079. So when A Stranger Calls set to a present-day audience in 2006, seeing the decent success that it had at the box office, he then aimed to adapt an even more prestigious title from the 70s, Charles Bronson's of the mechanic actor and all-around tough guy. Jason Statham was announced to be in the lead role soon after the project was initially developed. The film was praised by critics and welcomed by audiences as well when it was released in January 2011. Seeing how West was on a roll with reboots, he saw it fitting to continue digging deeper into this filmmaking niche. Could he pull off 3 successful remakes, though? When it came to his modern take on a 1986 neon-noir thriller, Ahita, based on a novel of the same name released just a year prior, Lady Luck did not seem to be on his side, as if he saw what the future held for this movie, not a positive one. West made a startling declaration in an attempt to change the incoming tide. His Jason Statham starring remake Wildcard is better seen as a drama than an action movie. Stepping in for Bear Reynolds, Statham stars as Nick Wilde, a bodyguard, chaperone for the various dentists located in and around Las Vegas. He accepts sad jobs as well, like showing tourists around the entertainment capital of the world, helping pop-up men in front of their girlfriends, and beating up on those who he feels deserve it. According to West in a detailed interview with the Live for Films, the Fast and Furious star was crafting this film himself for at least 5 years before it finally arrived in the director's sights. A Wildcard quickly shows the trademark fighting skills that Statham is best known for. He brutally destroys a couple of gangsters that had assaulted and raped a young escort. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in the course of the film. They just don't learn their lesson until the very end. But in the midst of all that, Statham surprisingly also portrays Samia, who has a gambling addiction, exhibits an anxiety attack, and constantly thinks about a different life. West just might be right. There are definitely traces of something more in a Wildcard than just action. First, let's look at the main actor's dialogue. Nick Wilde seemingly talks more than Statham's character Xena the Mechanica mentioned above, A Wrath of Man, and the Terry Cranka series combined. West was concerned with the number of lines, but the well-known English actor showed up on set with all of them memorized and ready to go. While this lone piece of trivia is not necessarily enough to persuade viewers to change the genre of the movie, fans of Statham will certainly see the actor in a different light once they watch. An argument could be made that he shows more emotions here than anywhere else in his career. Statham stepping out of his usual silent hero type interests, you then you might just consider Wild Card to be a drama. The next biggest point to make favoring West's genre transition of Wild Card is the supposed character-driven performance. There are only 3 fights in this hour-and-a-half film. While being interviewed by Ryan Lambio-Faden of Geek, West attempted to interconnect these two to Wild's personal arc. According to him, the first brawl was Wild needing to get back into the art of precision fighting, and the second time is more manifestation of his own inner anger. West never explicitly says attempt to put a thematic spin on Wild's fight with DeMarco's goons. The first fight is quite the far-fetched to make, considering his hand-to-hand combat abilities are never explained. There is a great deal of truth when it comes to the latter. The tussle inside the casino happens around the same time as Wild's display of excess gambling and subsequent panic attack. The anger that viewers see in his attacks against the gangsters doesn't only come from a place of self-defense, but disgust over his own personal choices. In this case, the chain of events leading up to this showdown does a lot to add to the character's violent outburst. Even though his fighting style is the usual brutal and quick routine, Statham lets himself be just a tad more reckless here, which proves he has ample acting range usually unseen. You have to give it to the Saint the Broken Bar, he does try, and sometimes with success. Most recently, I thought Hummingbird was very good, but as an actor, he is about as tight cast as someone can get. So if the other elements that make up the film don't work a broken bar, well, it's going to be Statham is Las Vegas, personal protection for hire Nick Wilder that everyone on the strip knows. But when a friend is beaten, raped by a young sadistic member of the mob, he helps her seek revenge while dealing with his own personal demons. To be honest, this felt like a film made for TV. The storylines never really feel like they are explored properly or concluded with any real satisfaction. You have Stath helping get revenge on mobster Milo Ventimiglia in the first act, followed by his addiction with gambling in the second, and finally, the mob getting a back after anti-hero in the third. Director Simon Westa tries to make each of these come full circle per act, and it just doesn't mesh together well as a film. Statham's friend Hooker, who is his sole motivation for doing what he's doing, disappears a third of the way through the film. Wild is, they meant to have this gambling addiction, but we see him once in a casino betting and losing his before he then gets on with business. It's all a bit inconsistent and feels like a lot of the story was thought of after the fact. Another thing that made it feel a little sloppy was plot device after plot device. There were numerous aspects to this film that purely served the purpose of explaining away the plot or getting something to happen and was not integral or consistent to what was happening. Because of this, there was barely a scene that had tension in it, as nothing had any continuing relevance. The action is pretty brutal when it happens, but feels like it's in there because we know Statham can kick transatlantic ass. No other reason. Sofia Vergara, Stanley Twee, and Jason Alexander are all in this film a broken bar. They can all act a broken bar. So why are they given one scene apiece? Especially Tucci. The guy is quality, and his character is definitely someone you want to know more about a broken bar. Poor utilization of talent equals PO filmmaking. It feels like I've been ragging on this film a lot so far, but there were actually aspects I liked about it. Some of the editing, particularly in the beginning, was cool and different, as I said, with Run All Night Time, all for films trying different ways of shooting. The script was also pretty strong and can be seen best by Statham's interaction with tertiary characters, bartenders, waitresses, old friends, strangers. No matter who the interaction was with, there was definitely a genuine sense of knowing between them. Lastly, the scene where Stath is in the casino was a tense and entertaining one. Not that I'd recommend to go see it based on that. Alone, though, I must confess to having a soft spot for Jason Statham. Along with The Rock, he's the last of the old-fashioned action stars. And much like Dwayne Johnson, he's also a far better actor than his heavily accented 1980s Verbeurers. Staff might specialize in C-grade action flicks, but at least he's good at it, and often picks projects strong enough that they can feel B-grade. Statham's latest adventure in Cockney as Kickery is a wild card. While the movie is not his best, that would be the A-Crank series for those playing at home. It's also far from his actually isn't even a straight action movie, but a strange, semi-conic Vegas character piece with splashes of violence. It's a pretty bizarre little movie by Statham standards. The film is undeniably flawed, yet kind of fun in its own word, rambling way. Statham stars in a particularly Esteperian role as a badass for hire in Las Vegas. His character Nick Wilde, yes, that's really his name, works out of the office of a lawyer. Jason Alexander, of all people, as tensibly, his job is to find and possibly rough up people for said lawyer. However, he's also a staff for hire who does anything from escorting nervous Nellies around Vegas to putting the fear of God into any no-goodness about the rambling plot. Sees Wilde hired out for such jobs as helping a nerd Max Casella seem tough in front of his girlfriend Sofia Vergara and chaperone and internet billionaire Michael Angarano through he gets a call from his good friend and call girl Dominic Garcia Laredo, who was brutally assaulted by a mobbed-up, out-of-town thug, Milo Ventimiglia. Wilde knows that if he helps her get revenge, he'll have to answer to the local mob boss Stanley Tucci, and that could be trouble, but he's such an honorable badass that he can't help himself. Plus, Wilde flirts a bit with his favorite local waitress and hatch and blackjack dealer Hope Davis, and has a ridiculously lucky productive night of gambling. So, broken bar, yeah, there's a lot going on here that kind of adds up to a plot, and kind of doesn't. Before discussing a wild card further, I should mention the project's long history. It's technically a remake of a horrible 1986 Burt Reynolds movie called Day Heat. That movie started as a script by the great William Goldman, a Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid at The Princess Bride, and was supposed to be directed by the equally great Robert Altman before he quit after a few days of fighting with Reynolds, and left the movie to be cobbled together by two other reluctant directors. The original film is a sloppy disaster. This version uses the same screenplay which combined Goldman's crackling dialogue and characterization with Altman's rambling character tape. Wry structure, then action and fight. Scenes were added to capitalize on the undeniable stay-thumbness of the new star. So a wild card is a damn weird movie. Sometimes it plays as a comedic character portrait, and sometimes it plays as a sleazy revenge flick. Some scenes reach for Goldman's sense of larger-than-life iconography, while others dig down to bargain. Bin stupid. Action. It's an odd concoction of elements that often feel like a mess, and just as often feel charmingly shaggy. If nothing else, it's never boring. Directing duties fell to Simon West, a former music video director who has made some crap. A Tomb Raider, a Broken Bar shutter, as well as two hysterically cheesy action blockbusters played for laughs. A Con Air and The Expendables 2, as well as the underrated Statham, starring remake of a mechanic. West is no genius, but he's kind of an inspired choice for this strange little movie. He works well with actors, and gets some delightful supporting turns out of the likes of Tui Davis and Angarano. He also has a keen sense of humor, which saves Goldman's script from moments of potential success. Most importantly, he knows exactly how to tailor a movie to his star's particular skill set and gets the most out of this day's cottony charm and lethal fists. Nothing can completely overcome the awkwardly episodic structure and odd meaninglessness of Goldman's dusty screenplay, but the movie gets enough entertainment value on a scene-by-scene basis that it doesn't quite matter when things don't add up. There's something oddly engrossing and charming about this weird little movie that's somehow simultaneously an eccentric character comedy, a B-grade action flick, and an exploration of fate. It might flop and fail at times, but always does so on its own quirky terms. I can't imagine that a wild card will be a hit given that it's two-word and talky for staff core audience while also far too meaninglessly sleazy and stay for serious cinema goers. Nonetheless, for those select few viewers who enjoy both a California Split and a Transporter 2, there's something compelling about this oddball little movie. It's no masterpiece, but it is unconventionally entertaining by Jason Statham standards. That ain't much, but it's something I must confess to having a soft spot for Jason Statham. Along with The Rock, he's the last of the old-fashioned action stars. And much like Dwayne Johnson, he's also a far better actor than his heavily accented 1980s forbearers. Stath might specialize in C-grade action flicks, but at least he's good at it, and often picks projects strong enough that they can feel B-grade. Statham's latest adventure in Cockney as Kickery is a wild card. While the movie is not his best, that would be the A-Crank series for those playing at home. It's also far from his worst. A wild card actually isn't even a straight action movie, but a strange, semi-comic Vegas character piece with splashes of violence. It's a pretty bizarre little movie by Statham standards. The film is undeniably flawed, yet kind of fun in its own rambling way. Statham stars in a particularly Steve Perian role as a badass for hire in Las Vegas. His character Nick Wilde, yes, that's really his name, works out of the office of a lawyer, Jason Alexander of all people ostensibly. His job is to find and possibly rough up people for said lawyer. However, he's also a staff for hire who does anything from escorting nervous Nellies around Vegas to putting the fear of God into any no-ambling plot sees Wilde hired out for such jobs as helping a nerd Max Casella seem tough in front of his girlfriend Sofia Vergara and chaperone an internet billionaire Michael Angarano through casinos. Then, he gets a call from his good friend and call girl Dominic Garcia Laredo, who was brutally assaulted by a mobbed-up, out-of-town thug, Milo Ventimiglia. Wilde knows that if he helps her get revenge, he'll have to answer to the local mob boss Stanley Tucci, and that could be trouble, but he's such an honorable badass that he can't help himself. Plus, Wilde flirts a bit with his favorite local waitress and hatch and blackjack dealer Hope Davis, and has a ridiculously lucky productive night of gambling. So, Broken Bar, yeah, there's a lot going on here that kind of adds up to a plot and kind of doesn't. Before discussing a wild card further, I should mention the project's long history. It's technically a remake of a horrible 1986 Burt Reynolds movie called Day Heat. That movie started as a script by the great William Goldman, a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid at The Princess Bride, and was supposed to be directed by the equally great Robert Altman before he quit after a few days of fighting with Reynolds and left the movie to be cobbled together by two other reluctant directors. The original film is a sloppy disaster. This version uses the same screenplay which combined Goldman's crackling dialogue and characterization with Altman's rambling character tape. Wry structure, then action and fight. Scenes were added to capitalize on the undeniable Stathamness of the new star. So a wild card is a damn weird movie. Sometimes it plays as a comedic character portrait, and sometimes it plays as a sleazy revenge flick. Some scenes reach for Goldman's sense of larger-than-life iconography, while others dig down to bargain bin stupid action. It's an odd concoction of elements that often feel like a mess, and just as often feel charmingly shaggy. If nothing else, it's never boring. Directing duties fell to Simon West, a former music video director who has made some crap, a Tomb Raider, a Broken Bar Shutter, as well as 2 hysterically cheesy action blockbusters played for laughs, a Con Air and The Expendables 2, as well as the underrated Statham, starring remake of a mechanic. West is no genius, but he's kind of an inspired choice for this strange little movie. He works well with actors and gets some delightful supporting turns out of the likes of Tui Davis and Angarano. He also has a keen sense of humor, which saves Goldman's script from moments of potential success. Most importantly, he knows exactly how to tailor a movie to his star's particular skill set and gets the most out of this day's cottony charm and lethal fists. Nothing can completely overcome the awkwardly episodic structure and odd meaninglessness of Goldman's dusty screenplay, but the movie gets enough entertainment value on a scene-by-scene basis that it doesn't quite matter when things don't add up. There's something oddly engrossing and charming about this weird little movie that's somehow simultaneously an eccentric character comedy, a B-grade action flick, and an exploration of fate. It might flop and fail at times, but always does so on its own quirky terms. I can't imagine that a wild card will be a hit given that it's too word and talky for staffcore audience, while also far too meaninglessly sleazy and stay for serious cinema goers. Nonetheless, for those select few viewers who enjoy both a California Split and a Transporter too, there's something compelling about this oddball little movie. It's no masterpiece, but it is unconventionally entertaining by Jason Statham standards. That ain't much, but it's something. There's also an underlining sense of wry humor and urge to be something else. Maybe a little more kiss bang bang, but it doesn't have the level of wit or smarts to take it to anywhere near those lofty heights. Goldman introduces a lot of characters, but doesn't go particularly deep in terms of context with the exception of a couple of lines. Even Statham's Wild isn't really given a lot to chew on. He might as well be wearing a t-shirt that says former special forces, etc. Statham could play this type of role in his sleep. But West does something a little different with the action, which is enough to keep you entertained until the next scoffle. Also, Stanley Twee turns up for a few minutes, instantly making those scenes better than the rest of the film. If action is what you're looking for, then wait for the superb John Wick in a couple of weeks. Greetings again from the darkness. Most of us know what to expect when we hear it's a Jason Statham movie. However, when you add to that written by 2-time Oscar winner William Goldman, it generates a bit more excitement and higher expectations than normal. This becomes slightly complicated when the Jason Statham partner stretches his acting, but it's the script that is essentially a letdown. The film is a remake of the 1986 film Mojito with Burt Reynolds, and both movie versions are based on Goldman's novel of that title. This time, it's Jason Statham as Las Vegas security expert Nick Wilde, who possesses a particular set of skills, a broken bar to go along with the drinking and gambling problem. Known for such films: Oicon Era 1997, Atom Mechanica, also with Statham 2011, and The Expendables 2A, also with Statham 2012 direct, or Simon Westa is no stranger to action sequences and cool guys with baggage. There are a couple of outstanding fight scenes that capitalize on Nick Wilde's preference for non-traditional weapons, including a huge finale at the Silver Spoon Diner, where he utilizes silver spoons. Statham gets an opportunity to do something besides fight and drive, as he is cast as the emotionally handicapped warrior with a big heart. He protects his friends and does favors for those who are weaker. In fact, the banter between he and the Michael Anger and Noah as Cyrus is some of the best work of Statham's career. The noir speak dialogue allows Statham to have some fun with vocabulary words, but the script never really lets him connect with anyone other than Cyrus. Instead, we get too many scenes of guzzling vodka and an extended blackjack scene that is so predictable, it's actually kind of annoying to watch. The biggest downside to the film is the steady stream of recognizable and pretty well-known actors who pop up for only a brief scene, or two. The list include as a Sophia Fury as sporting a sweater that flaunts her assets, a Max Quisella as her conniving boyfriend, a Jason Alexandra as an office-sharing attorney, a Hope Disa as a blackjack dealer, a Dominic Garcia Laroa, Andy Garcia's daughter as Nick's call in need, a Milo Ventimiglia as bad guy Danny DeMarco, Ayan Haya as the supportive diner waitress and a wonderful but all too brief, a Stanley, Tessa as a hotel casino owner modeled on a few real-life owners and mobsters. Although the film skips the traditional staff and car chases and lovemaking, we do get many flashy shots of him driving a classic Pontiac GT. The old-school Vegas setting is a welcome diversion from the glitzy New Vegas we more often see in movies. Keeping with the retro feel is Dean Martin crooning Blue Christmas in the opening moments and other classic songs carefully coordinated throughout the story. Statham struggles with alcohol and gambling, and his stated intent to leave Vegas forever provide the film with an incredibly disjointed and lightweight story from the pen of someone as decorated as William Goldman. It's nice to see Statham sport a bit of emotional depth, but the film likely doesn't offer enough fight scenes for his true fans. The dark and humorous moments provide enough entertainment to encourage those fans to give it a shot. But please be careful with those spoons. Who doesn't like movies about bodyguards pummeling piss rapist gangsters half to death? Burt Reynolds was the first to do this almost 30 years ago in the original version of this movie in a heat dot. It wasn't received well and was the subject of some legal controversy. So maybe little-known movies that weren't blowing away audiences on their first release are prime for remake status. A Step Up Jason Statham and Con Air Expendables. 2. Director Simon West to try and make it work on the second attempt. Does it work this time? Not really. The film was shot on location in Las Vegas. A good start. Although I did spot some green screen at one point, it adds to the we're taking this seriously, so give us a chance mentality. After a friend of his is raped her and brutalized by high-rolling thug gangsters she was hanging out with. An enforcer for shy Jason Statham is approached by her and asked to meet out manly vengeance. Just a highlight that this isn't another Seagal-esque, faceless, unstoppable X. Statham says no. That if you run with dogs, expect the worst. Of course, after deliberation, Statham changes his mind and violence ensues. Violence against the mob has consequences, so staff must win enough money at the tables to flee Vegas for good before they come to collect against the manly carnage left by the bald-headed one. But that's pretty much where Wildcard hits the skids. If only the second half of the movie was as good as the first. It's not bad, just that it descends into average high-end DTV staff affair, not exciting, and like a poorly written, a Locto stock, And it also has an odd subplot involving a super fan of Nick Wilde, which is used to wrap up the movie in a totally unbelievable way. This is Statham's best acting performance in years, with shades of his Guy Ritchie performances, even if the writing doesn't match those movies. It also has a good, don't want to say a great fight sequences, which are mostly steady. I do notice, though, that Statham isn't as agile in his fighting these days, at lot less high kicks than there were 10 years ago. Or is it just me? But ultimately, this film is betrayed by a weak second half, and even weaker ending. If I'm being honest here because of that, think giving it a 6 might even be a bit generous. Jason Statham tries his hand at some capital A acting playing Nick, wild a Las Vegas bodyguard and recovering gambling addict who sets out to help an old girlfriend, Dominic Garcia Laredo, after she's assaulted by sadistic mobster Milo Ventimiglia. If that sounds like a tale with all of the usual trappings of a typical Statham actioner, it's worth noting that it's based on William the Princess Bride Goldman's 1985 novel, Laita, previously adapted for the big screen in '86, starring Burt Reynolds. So, while the star gets a couple of opportunities to beat people up, a wild card is actually a rather more thoughtful and offbeat piece of cinema than his fans may be expecting. As happy as we are to see Statham doing something a little different and doing it rather well, that doesn't automatically make you a wild guard, a cracking piece of cinema. This is a film too happy to wallow in familiar Vegas cliché, dilda copyrights, and it suffers from an uneven narrative structure, not helped by a lengthy opening sequence that has literally no bearing whatsoever on anything that follows. So, while it was clearly worth the gamble from Statham's point of view, a wild card ultimately ends up as an interesting failure. Despite being shot using Red Epic digital cameras, director Simon West and cinematographer Shelley Johnson have attempted to give you a wild card 70s aesthetic. This means that the Blu-ray's 2.40/40:1 Full HD encode is not only thick with digital grain, but also features a muted color palette and high contrast style that blows out highlights while crushing blacks right down. This has the effect of giving medium and long shots a slightly soft appearance. Although close-ups still retain plenty of fine detail, how many adjacents stay does this make? Over the last decade or so, the star has become a staple of the mid-winter, late summer release windows. His mid-budgeted action dramas are almost always as accessible as they are forgettable. His new film, A Wild Card, directed by Chasman, West and released simultaneously in theaters, and that is no different. Once slated to be directed by Brian De Palma, the film is a remake of the 1986 Burt Reynolds Stared, which it was written by William Goldman based on his 1985 novel of the same name. Goldman's back to write the update, and the film runs along at a lean 92 minutes at 85 minutes, not including end credits. Statham has perfected the art of the tough guy with the heart of gold and the hero he plays. Here, the aptly named Wild Day is the nice. As the tough guy in Vegas, early on, he helps out a balding buddy of his impress a beautiful woman. Sofia Vergara, blink and you'll miss her for $500 bucks. When his buddy comes to pay up, he offers Nick an extra $500 for a job well done, and Nick refuses not. Unlike his character from a Transportra series, or really any movie he's ever made. This is a man with principles. He ultimately takes a job with a young millionaire named Cyrus Kinnick. Michael Angarano growing into quite the character actor to be his bodyguard of sorts as he runs around Vegas gambling. When an old friend named Adali Dominic Garcia Loro comes calling, Nick's life gets complicated. She's been to a pulp and looking for revenge against the gangster named Danny DeMarco, Milo Ventimiglia, a master of slime. Nick initially refuses. Then Holly reminds him it was she who picked him up from Rogue Bottom not too long ago. See, Nick has something of a gambling problem with relative ease. Nick dispatches of Danny and his goons, collecting 50 grand in the process. After splitting the money with Holly, he lives at the blackjack table for a night and a day. Zoe's favorite dealer, Cassandra Hope Davis, watching him win big and then lose bigger. This is a snappily edited film that finds a surprisingly solid middle ground between fast action and gangster melodrama. As Danny runs down Nick in the third act, Cyrus becomes something of an unneeded sidekick. Not unlike the original film, there seems to be far too much going on in an hour and a half, most of which barely matters to the central narrative. That said, It's these aids that allow for fun cameos from great actors, especially one from a Stanley Tusa towards the end. I'll never profess to being a Jason Statham fan, but there's something I find strangely likable about this earthiest of action heroes. It's almost as if his lack of star charisma actually makes him charismatic in a working man sense. I found myself kind of enjoying his last solo vehicle, a Homer 2013, and once again, find myself kind of enjoying his new one, a Wild Card. Although the movie is ultimately let down by both Statham's lack of range and its own lack of a decent budget. It's not that the British actor isn't trying a wild card, it feels like an attempt by Statham to dig a little deeper into his standard anti-hero character. And that does come across to some degree thanks to the involvement of legendary screenwriter William Goldman, who knows a thing or two about anti-heroes. Look him up, please, if you are not familiar with the man's work. It also helps that the script is based on his own novel, Ahita. Also, the basis of a disastrous 1986 Burt Reynolds film of the same name. Statham plays Nick Wilde, a freelance security guard and occasional enforcer who works in Sin City and has a little addiction problem when it comes to the casinos, when a rich thug, Milo Ventimiglia, and his two bodyguards beat up a call girl, Dominic Garcia Laredo, who happens to be a friend of Nick's and perhaps wants something more. She calls on him to help enact her nasty revenge. It turns out, however, that the thug is the son of a powerful mob boss. So, it's not very long before Nick has to contend with the small army of goons coming to seek revenge. At the same time, he's also dealing with Cyrus Kinnick, Michael Angarano, an incredibly young and astonishingly wealthy tech entrepreneur who wants Nick's help with his own social skills, but soon wants to aid the former soldier of fortune in getting out of Vegas once and for all. There are two things that stand out about a wild card: the long string of cameos from folks like Anne Hatch, Jason, Alexander, and Sofia Vergara that take quirky little side characters created by Goldman and breathe a little extra life into them. Best of all are Hope Davis as Cassandra, Nick's sympathetic friend, who also happens to be a blackjack dealer and thus an agent of his downfall, and Stanley, too, as Baby, owner of the casino, where Ventimiglia and his hoodlums first collide with Nick. You can never go wrong with Tui. And this time he skirts a fine line of New Compass. He presides over a sort of underworld trial in the basement of his hotel. Like a John Wicca and some other recent films that do a little world building, a wild card that does play around with hinting at a completely separate criminal society that lurks just behind the glitzy faux decadent surface of Vegas and the slack-eyed tourists shuffling across it. The second thing that stands out is an extended tense sequence in which Nick, while waiting for the mobsters to arrive, goes on a hot streak at the table and jacks his winnings up to $500,000 at one point. Like a classic gambling addict, Nick sees his good fortune as his ticket out of the life he currently leads, only to find himself helpless to stop. With its roller coaster emotions and real suspense, this one scene is more compelling than the entirety of Mark Wahlberg's nihilistic, joyless sessions in last year's remake of Fast Gambler. As I noted earlier, you can almost feel Statham reaching for something more in this scene, and others, but he's only capable of so much. This is a gay, after all, who's been called upon to use his fists more than his emotions in the 30-odd films he's made since debuting Ena Locke, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels back in 1998. But I will give him points for the attempt and for making Nick a somewhat more substantial portrayal than a lot of the work I've seen him do before. The rest of the film proceeds in more predictable fashion. The subplot with Angarano has a jarring tone that clashes with the more serious crime elements, and even Goldman succumbs to the recent trend of setting every action thriller around the Christmas holidays for no apparent reason. The movie loses steam almost entirely in the third act, as the lack of money becomes more apparent with 2 or 3 previous fight scenes already on the books. We're led to expect a larger, more epic confrontation for the grand finale, but instead we get Statham jumping 5 guys next to a dumpster in back of a diner. Simon West, Conair at the Expendables 2, that most generic of action directors, handles everything here in steady, unremarkable fashion. He adds a touch of style here and there, but never gets in the way of the story, such as it is. Allahu, a wild guard eventually builds to a disappointing conclusion. I found myself rooting for Nick and interested in his predicament and the world around him for 2-3 or so of the movie, and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.